Hey, would you like to sew a summer dress? Okay, let's do it together. This year I actually planned ahead. I made a summer dress quite early on, actually. So I'm ahead, of the curve. But now let's move over to the dress I'm making. This time I have actually made a pattern that is for sale. You can download this one from my Ko-fi account if you would like to. And here I'm sharing on the screen the process of making the sketches. And I do this all the time. Here I'm showing you one of my sales folders I'm working on for one of the brands I'm working for. So I do these kind of sketches all the time. And here I tried to make it in a little bit more fun way, not so strict and formal. And the dress itself, it has a deep V in front and back, but also a little triangle inset front and back to give you a bit of coverage. Also, the shoulder straps are enough to cover the bra straps. It is made with 2 patch pockets in front, and it is pretty wide. There are 6 pleats in the front and 6 pleats in the back, and really wide at the bottom, very swishy. And here's the back side. It is more or less identical with the front of the dress. Also very deep pleats. And the dress is quite simple, no fastenings, you just pull it on over your head. The pattern is only available in size large, and it doesn't come with any instructions, but you can use this video as sort of sew along, and it is, I promise, a very easy dress to make. And finally here you see the layout of the pattern, and I think you need to print like 35 pages to make this, so not overly much. Let's move on to sewing the dress. And the first thing I need to do is to iron it, and then I'm using spray starch to make it a little easier to work with, because this fabric is extremely thin and flimsy. This type of spray starch, you just spray it on and then you iron it and it becomes a little bit stiffer. I am starting with cutting out the top pieces, the shoulder straps you could say. I am cutting them a little bit bigger because this fabric is so thin that I am afraid that if I stretch it out, it's going to break. So I add maybe 2 centimeters on each side under the arms. And the next step is to cut out these triangles for front and back. I had a huge problem picking out the perfect fabric for this, contrasting but not too much. And of course I didn't really have enough of it. And everything at the top half is double layer. Here I am fiddling with the front triangle, and to avoid having the back side, which is black, showing at the top, I am folding over a short piece of this fabric to the back side so that the seam between green and black ends up a little bit down on the inside, if that makes sense. So all of the inside of the top of this dress will be made in black thin cotton. This little front triangle I would normally have made with the fabric folded double along the top edge, but this is not possible. There's not enough fabric, so I'm piecing it on the inside by cutting one of these very long thin triangles at the end from the black fabric, and also remembering to add seam allowance here. So this is how it's going to look when it's all done. And the back triangle, well, that one is pieced too. There's a seam along the center of it from top to bottom instead of on the back side. But here I am placing the seam along the top fold, so the whole of the back will be black. And the next step is cutting out the back side of the skirt. I am adding seam allowance here because this is my sample pattern, but if you do buy the pattern, seam allowance is added 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. And here I am using my original pattern where the skirt front was in 3 pieces. My original design here was that there was supposed to be a pocket included here, but I decided against that because the fabric is so very, very thin. And this piece of fabric, I did have a little bit extra on each side, so I actually used the ruler and made this piece a little bit wider because I wanted it to be super swishy and wide. And as you can see, I only made it wider at the bottom. Over here at the top end, it is still its original size. So I just moved the side seam out a short bit. And that's all pieces cut out. Now it's time to start marking the darts of the top part. And for the front, of course, there are 4 pieces. one on each side and then the lining in the thin black cotton. And after that it's of course time to sew the darts. There are one dart on each side of the front, but no darts in the back. And here's the front triangle, or actually more like a diamond when it's unfolded. I am sewing it right side to right side and pressing apart, and now you can see clearly that the division between the green and the black fabric is a little bit off center. And on the back side I am marking the tip of the triangle pretty carefully, and then I'm pinning it right side to right side of the dress. And it's quite important to be careful here because they need to meet in a very nice and neat point at the bottom of the triangle. And here they are, sewn right side to right side, both of them, and they are meeting in a very clear point, and that is 1.5 centimeters from the edge, because they meet exactly at the seam, not the end of the seam allowance. And the next step is to attach the lining, the inside of the top. And you do that on the other side so that you are enclosing this seam allowance. You pin it to the other side of the seam that you just did. And that is right side to right side with the front piece, with the front triangle sandwiched in between. And because of the flimsiness of this fabric, I did cut the lining on a slightly different grain, and that is working perfect. The shoulder straps are not stretching at all in the lining fabric, I should say. And then, of course, you repeat this step with all the 4 pieces of the top. So in the end, you have one front and one back complete with the triangle in the middle. And now it's time to burrito the arm openings. And as you see, I am just bunching up everything inside and then flipping the one side of the top over so it is right side to right side with itself. Matching up the edges of the armhole, pinning it together and sewing it along that edge. Not the top of the shoulder and not the side, just the edge of the armhole. And you do this on one side at a time. I am also marking the width of the shoulder strap, which is 5 centimeters. That is 2 inches. And they need to be quite exact because you are matching them up later. So it's important to have this measure exact when you sew. And then you do that along this edge. You flip it out. And then you have it. All neat covered edges on all sides, and then you repeat it on the other side of this top, including measuring the strap so that it's exactly the width it should be when you sew it. And when you have done the same thing on all 4 sides of the shoulder, it's time to attach the 2 shoulders together. First you pin right side to right side of the outer fabric only. You fold under the lining fabric so that you can sew just across in the outer fabric. You can see me here showing it with the pins holding down the lining fabric, and on the front side it looks like this. Make sure you put the right places together. After you've sewn it through the outer fabric, you can push one side of the lining fabric under the other one and fold that one under to the inside, and this will give a very neat edge on the inside of the shoulder. And the outside is of course sewn in the ordinary way. Here you see the pins. You should sew this together by hand to give a very neat finish. But since this is quite a simple summer dress with lots of top stitching, I am top stitching here, and yeah, it didn't turn out all that neat. But it's on the inside. Who cares? After that, I pinned the top together at the sides and tried it on. And I did need a little bit of that fabric I added. I top stitch around the neck, and the next step is to add the side panels to the front of the skirt. As I said, my original pattern came with side panels to the skirt. And the way I pin and sew seams like this that are very long and hanging down like the side seams of a skirt is that I hold the fabric up in the air. Pin the first maybe 10 centimeters at the top and lift it up straight up from the table and let it hang down. And you do this to make sure that the side seams are equally stretched out. Never pin seams like this lying down on the table. You will end up with seams that are sort of warped and buckling, and it's very, very common. I see it all the time. What you need to do is lift them up, hang them freely, shake them, let them hang freely, and then you pin them together along the side seam in maybe 3 or 4 places. After that, you put it down on the table and adjust so it's straight. But you don't stretch any of them in any way after this. Make sure that as you pin them, is the way you sew them. And here the front seams are sewn, and it's time to make the folds. I pin them according to the markings and using a lot of pins, and then I pin them to the top front, and of course sew it together from the back side. This was a very flimsy, flowy fabric, so I needed tons of pins, but it ended up with all the folds in the correct place. And after that, of course, I overlocked this edge and pressed it. All looking good. It's time to move over to the back side. And here I had to do a little bit of cutting. It had ended up being a bit uneven. And now it's time to bring out the back piece and attach it. And immediately I did get a little bit confused about these folds. I had to bring out the pattern again and make sure that I had it all completely clear. And once I was sure, I could pin all these pleats in place. And in this fabric, it was so flimsy and moving in all the directions at once. And I had to use at least 2, but mostly like 4 or 5 pins per pleat, so tons of pinning, but that's of course something you get back in the end when the pleats end up being as they should. But this did take a little bit of time. But finally it's time to attach the top of the back to the bottom. Pinning it in place and more pins, yeah. I think I used maybe like 50 pins for just this piece. After sewing and overlocking, it is also complete. The back side is also complete. Now the side seams. I'm not hiding these seams in any way. I'm just sewing them together. So the inside of the armhole is maybe not the most elegant, but once again it's a very simple sundress. And who cares? Now here I'm also following the markings that I made earlier when I tried it on. And of course, when pinning the side seams, I am once again lifting it all up in the air and allowing them to fall as they wish, so none of the sides get stretched out. And I am showing you this once again because this is really important. It does make a difference to how your skirts and dresses and coats look if you do this thing with the side seams. And finally, pockets. Can you see the pockets? Yeah, there they are. Secret pockets. You absolutely cannot see them. This is camouflage fabric. And they are quite ordinary patch pockets, except that the opening is on the side. Here I'll show you a close-up. And the last step is to let it hang a little and make it even along the bottom. I overlocked it and I just turned up a very narrow hem, maybe 1 centimeter. And that's all, folks. The dress is done and it is time for the reveal.